On Tuesday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, he gave two speeches, one in Hebrew and one in English, uh, where he said that any attempt to arrest Israeli officials for war crimes would be a, quote, anti-Semitic hate crime. Now, here's the context. The International Criminal Court, let me make a distinction, not the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice, which is the high court of the UN, it's The Hague, that's one court. Israel's already been brought there. But now there's the International Criminal Court. So not the ICJ, but the ICC. The ICC's job is to investigate war crimes in particular. And there are growing conversations from the ICC and around the world that Israeli military leaders and Israeli political leaders might get arrested, that there will be arrest warrants sent out for the Israeli leadership, which means that, as a practical matter, what that means is if Netanyahu lands in South Africa or Itamar Ben-Gvir shows up in, I don't know, France. It won't happen in France. That's a bad example, but it could happen in France. But let's say he were to go to Nicaragua. They could be arrested as war criminals. And we've seen this before. I mean, Putin narrowly escaped some charges like this. We've seen many African leaders charged. In fact, unfortunately, the International Criminal Court seems to be only really effective at locking up African leaders. They don't do a good job with the West. They don't do a good job with the powerful European nations. They don't do a good job with the United States. And many Western countries, don't even hold membership status with the ICC. So it's complicated. But the point is, Benjamin Netanyahu said, even if y'all say it's a war crime, we don't care. That's the context, right? He said, if you lock us up for war crimes, we ain't the problem, you're the problem, right? He said specifically, and I quote, no ruling neither in The Hague. This is wild, y'all. This is absolutely wild. He said, no ruling, neither in The Hague nor anywhere else, will affect our determination to achieve all goals of war. Now, his goals of war, he said, are to, degrade Hamas, to make sure that Hamas will never be a threat to Israel, security threat to Israel again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then he was very specific about one of the goals of Israel, and that is to invade southern Gaza. He said, we're going to go into Rafah. And he said, even if there's a hostage deal, let me listen to this. Netanyahu said, even if there is a hostage deal, even if there is a ceasefire deal, this is Netanyahu. He said, regardless, he said, we're still going to invade Rafah. So he's basically saying, no matter what happens, even if we agree to peace, we're still going to ground invade. Now, understand, a ground invasion of Rafah would be a disaster of epic proportion. In fact, today, the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, said that a ground invasion of Rafah would be a, quote, unbearable escalation. He said it would be devastating for Palestinians in Gaza. Martin Griffiths, who is the UN Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, said the simplest truth is that a ground operation in Rafah will be nothing short of a tragedy beyond words. No humanitarian plan can counter that. Germany even, we just talked about Germany. Germany even says this is a disaster. You can't invade Rafah. Biden doesn't want him to invade Rafah. He won't say it in public because he's, whatever. But he's preparing for an invasion that would be a gross humanitarian crisis. Let me tell you why, and then I'll tie it all up for you. The city of Rafah has about 250,000 people in it normally. But since October 7th, Israel has depopulated villages. They've destroyed homes. They've 70%, maybe now 80% now, I believe, of Gaza is unhoused. They're homeless. As they're taking people from the north and kicking them out, they're moving them to the center of the country and then to the south. Rafah is at the very south. It's right near Egypt. That's where the border is. There are now 1.5 million people there. So I'm going to just say that again. Normally 250,000 people there in Rafah. The whole country has 2.2 million, minus the 40,000 they've killed. They've taken 2.2 million people and squeezed most of them into this tiny city. And the people they squeezed into this tiny city don't have houses. They don't have clothing. Many are children who don't have parents or supervision. These are people who don't have food. And now, right as they're getting settled, they're going to do a ground invasion. They said it's going to create a humanitarian disaster, maybe that we've never seen before. You're literally creating a military action that isn't going to degrade Hamas. It's not going to stop the war. It's just going to kill a significant chunk of Palestinians. These are war crimes. So the reason why you see the ICC saying, hey, we might try y'all for war crimes, is because of the ground invasion in Rafah. It's the fact that they've used food and water as weapons of war, or really they've used hunger and starvation as a weapon of war. It's because they have literally killed humanitarian workers like the World Central Kitchen in front of everybody. They've killed people, Palestinians waiting in line for food in places like the Kuwaiti roundabout. They have bombed hospitals. They've carpet bombed areas. They have killed journalists. There's a million reasons to try Israel for war crimes. And Netanyahu's response is, if you try us for war crimes, or even if you arrest us for war crimes, it's an anti-Semitic hate crime. And this is the frustration that people feel. This is the frustration that people experience every day. There is so much anti-Semitism in the world. There is so much anti-Semitism in the world. It's real, and it's not getting smaller. We have to be honest about that. As we acknowledge that anti-Semitism, we also have to acknowledge that anti-Semitism is being weaponized cynically by people like Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu is effectively saying that to hold Israel accountable for war crimes is active anti-Semitism. Now, to make a good faith interpretation of his argument, what he would say is that you're isolating the only Jewish state and you're stopping Jewish people from defending themselves from people who are only trying to kill them because they're Jewish. The problem is, it's not true, right? Whatever you think of Hamas and their actions on October 7th, and again, I regard Hamas's action on October 7th as a war crime, as a violation, as a contravention of international law, and as a hateful act. I don't agree with the capturing of civilians. All that's true. I have space in my brain to be able to have that critique of Hamas and still point out Israel's war crimes. But Netanyahu is trying to make us believe that once October 7th happened, we don't have to think about October 8th, and we don't have to remember October 6th. And neither can be true. Israel has to be held accountable. Israel has to be held accountable, both for what happened prior to October 7th, but also for October 8th and 9th and 10th, all the way up to day 200, and we were on day 207. We have to be able to have that conversation. But Netanyahu represents a particular approach, a very cynical approach to Middle East politics, and particularly to Israeli-Palestinian politics, where any criticism of Israel is seen as anti-Semitic, and any act of aggression against Israel is seen as an act against Jews, because they're conflating Jewishness and Judaism with Israel and Israeli statecraft. They're conflating Zionism with Judaism. right? And so any critique of Israel becomes as such a critique of Judaism. That's problematic. That's problematic. I think the other piece of this is we have to be honest. Hamas is not some global caliphate or some, you know. Can we play that? Yeah, let's hear this.
This would be an outrage of historic proportions. International bodies like the ICC arose in the wake of the Holocaust committed against the Jewish people. They were set up to prevent such horrors, to prevent future genocides. Yet now, the International Court is trying to put Israel in the dock. It's trying to put us in the dock as we defend ourselves against genocidal terrorists and regimes, Iran, of course, that openly works to destroy the one and only Jewish state. Branding Israel's leaders and soldiers as war criminals will pour jet fuel on the fires of anti-Semitism, those fires that are already raging on the campuses of America and across capitals around the world. It will also be the first time that a democratic country fighting for its life according to the rules of war is itself accused of war crimes.
All right, stop it.
The Israeli army, the IDF,
I can't take
is one of the most...
I can't take this either. Okay. So first of all, again, he's weaponizing the past to justify the present, or he's exploiting the past to justify the present. He's saying that these conventions on genocide, that the criminal courts, all these things were used to protect the Jewish people. He's right. He's absolutely right. The whole reason we have a convention on genocide, the whole reason we have this international consensus about that we must stop genocide and fight genocide wherever is precisely because of what happened during the Nazi Holocaust. He's right. But that doesn't mean that Israel gets a free pass to commit genocide. He's saying that because these rallies or because these rules were made to support Jewish people in the 30s, in the 20s, we can't now rally against acts of genocide 100 years later against Israel. That makes no sense. The second thing he said is that's ridiculous is this will be the first time that a democratic country fighting for its life will be punished. First of all, Israel's not a democratic country, right? There's a one-state reality that denies citizenship, voting rights, etc., to millions of Palestinians, right? But on top of that, you're not following the rules of war. The rules of war don't let you blow up hospitals. The rules of war don't let you kill, don't let you just blow up schools and mosques and churches. The rules of war don't let you strike non-military targets indiscriminately. But Netanyahu is preparing for the inevitable, which is that the international courts are going to hold Israel accountable. But we can't buy into that. The U.S. is going to defend them. Germany is going to defend them. France is going to defend them. Fine, it's going to happen. But the question is, how do we respond to it? The world is changing and people aren't, no one wants to be called an anti-Semite because it's an awful thing to be and it's an awful thing to be called. But people are becoming less and less reluctant to engage in a principled critique of Israel because of the fear of being smeared as an anti-Semite. And finally, I'm going to start where I started. Anti-Semitism is real, and we have a duty to fight anti-Semitism everywhere it appears. We also have to make sure that we don't cheapen the conversation by mislabeling things as anti-Semitism. And we also want to make sure that we don't engage in a very profound act of anti-Semitism by attributing to the state of Israel the capacity to determine Judaism, or maybe even better put, we shouldn't be defining Judaism by what Israel does. Can you imagine defining Christianity or Islam by what America or Canada or Australia or New Zealand or France or Germany or South Sudan or Saudi Arabia or Iraq or Iran does? Of course not. The issue isn't with Jewish people. The issue isn't with the Jewish diaspora. The issue isn't with Jewish people. The issue is with the state of Israel and its particular practices toward the Palestinian people. And that critique is just as valid as the similarly urgent critique that we have to have of how Native populations are treated in Canada, residential schools, or the United States, with the erasure of Indians. We have to look at how Uyghurs are treated in China. We have to look at all of these questions. Again, Israel should not be held to a higher standard, but it also can't be held to a lower one.